In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court struck down Trump's tariffs, ruling he overstepped his authority by imposing taxes without Congress. Markets reacted instantly, with stocks and commodities fluctuating. The ruling is a historic check on presidential power, reshaping trade policy and the balance of government. The legal challenge to Trump's tariffs was remarkable for its bipartisan nature. Lawmakers from both parties united, concerned that the presidency had grown too powerful in trade matters. 37 senators and 171 representatives filed a brief with the Supreme Court, arguing the president's use of tariffs was a dangerous overreach. Their alliance was a rare show of unity in a divided Washington. Democratic Senators Jeanne Shaheen and Ron Wyden led the effort, joined by Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski. They argued the Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to regulate commerce and levy taxes. Allowing any president to bypass Congress on such a critical issue, they warned, would set a dangerous precedent. For decades, Congress has ceded power to the executive, but Trump's use of emergency powers for tariffs was a step too far. The bipartisan group turned to the courts to restore the balance of power. Their fight was about protecting Congress's role as a co-equal branch and ensuring major economic decisions required deliberation, not executive decree. The legal battle was about more than tariffs. It was about defending the Constitution. The Supreme Court faced a pivotal question: can a president use a national emergency to impose global tariffs? The Trump administration argued the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, gave the president broad authority to respond to threats, including economic competition. Opponents countered that IEEPA was never meant for general trade policy, but for targeted emergencies like sanctions on rogue states. They argued using IEEPA for sweeping tariffs was an unprecedented expansion of presidential power, violating the separation of powers. The power to tax and regulate commerce, they stressed, belongs to Congress. The administration insisted the law's language was broad, giving the president discretion in emergencies. But critics warned this would turn IEEPA into a blank check for executive economic control. The case became a test of the judiciary's role in policing the boundaries between Congress and the president. The Supreme Court had to decide, is IEEPA a limited tool for crises or a license for unchecked presidential power? The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, was passed in 1977 to let presidents respond swiftly to foreign crises. Historically, it's been used for targeted sanctions, freezing assets of terrorists or rogue states, not for broad trade policy. Trump's use of IEEPA to impose global tariffs was a radical departure from its original intent. Critics argued this move turned a scalpel into a sledgehammer, stretching the law far beyond its purpose. They feared it would let future presidents declare emergencies for political or economic reasons. The debate over IEEPA highlights a core tension. How much power should the president have to act alone in a crisis? IEEPA was meant to balance executive action with limits. The tariff case forced the Supreme Court to re-examine that balance and clarify the law's boundaries. Their ruling would define the reach of this powerful presidential tool for generations. The tariff's economic impact was immediate and severe for American businesses and families. Tariffs acted as taxes on imports, raising production costs for manufacturers and prices for consumers. Data showed a clear link between tariffs and higher prices for goods, squeezing profit margins and hindering investment. For families, everyday items, from washing machines to cars, became more expensive, hitting lower and middle-income households hardest. While some domestic producers benefited, the broader economy suffered from higher costs and retaliatory tariffs on U.S. exports. Importing companies brought lawsuits, claiming over $100 million in losses from what they argued were unlawful tariffs. The uncertainty made it nearly impossible for businesses to plan, hire, or invest. Tariffs disrupted global supply chains, forcing companies to scramble for new, often costlier suppliers. Long-standing international partnerships were damaged. The economic turmoil fueled the legal challenge, highlighting why such major policy changes should require congressional approval. Opponents argued that a deliberative legislative process would provide the stability businesses and the economy need. The case was about more than constitutional theory. It was about real-world survival. The Supreme Court's decision would determine whether such sweeping economic changes could be made by executive fiat. Even before the Supreme Court's decision, Congress tried to reverse the president's tariffs through legislation. The Senate became a battleground, with resolutions aimed at ending the national emergencies justifying the tariffs. These efforts, though bipartisan, faced stiff resistance, especially from House leadership loyal to Trump. Some resolutions passed the Senate, signaling growing discontent, but were blocked in the House. The legislative pushback was largely symbolic, unable to force immediate change. Frustration over gridlock drove lawmakers to join the judicial challenge. With legislative remedies blocked, the courts became the only avenue to contest presidential authority. The failed resolutions showed a significant portion of Congress opposed the tariffs but was procedurally blocked. This context strengthened the case for judicial intervention to resolve the constitutional conflict. As opposition mounted, the Trump administration escalated trade disputes, using tariffs as political leverage. In one instance, Trump abruptly increased tariffs on Canadian goods after a critical ad aired in Canada, raising questions about the true motives behind the tariffs. The administration also declared a new emergency related to Brazil, paving the way for more tariffs. Timed suspiciously after the prosecution of Trump ally Jair Bolsonaro. Critics argued these moves showed how unchecked tariff power could be wielded arbitrarily, damaging diplomatic relationships and U.S. credibility. Lawmakers pointed to these episodes as proof that presidential discretion in this area must be limited. The disputes with Canada and Brazil became examples of erratic foreign policy, not just trade disagreements. Each escalation hardened the resolve of the bipartisan coalition fighting the tariffs. The administration's defiance made the Supreme Court's intervention seem even more urgent. The justices were asked to decide not just on legality, but on whether to sanction a model of presidential power that grew more aggressive in the face of resistance. The stakes of the case rose with every new trade dispute. The Supreme Court became the final arbiter of executive power in trade. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska played a pivotal role, joining 36 Democratic senators in the Supreme Court challenge. Her decision to cross party lines underscored that concerns about presidential overreach transcended partisanship. Murkowski's involvement framed the legal challenge as a defense of the Constitution, not a political attack. She argued that the authority to levy tariffs is a core congressional power, not one for the president to seize through emergency declarations. Her stance was rooted in preserving the legislative branch's integrity and the balance of power. Murkowski's record of independence gave credibility to the lawsuit, making it harder to dismiss as partisan. Her participation highlighted a genuine cross-party consensus that executive power had gone too far. Murkowski's stand became a symbol of the deeper constitutional questions at stake. Sometimes, defending the Constitution means breaking with your own party. The Supreme Court sided with the bipartisan coalition, ruling that IEEPA cannot be used to impose broad tariffs. The court found such actions are taxes and regulations of commerce, powers reserved for Congress. While the president has significant emergency authority, it is not unlimited. The ruling invalidates the tariffs, forcing a rapid policy reversal and likely market volatility. More importantly, it sets a precedent curtailing presidential power in trade. Future presidents must seek explicit congressional approval for major trade actions. The decision redraws the lines of power, reasserting congressional authority and the separation of powers. For decades, Congress ceded trade power to the president. This ruling reverses that trend. Free trade advocates celebrated. Protectionists and Trump supporters decried the decision. With unilateral tariff power curtailed, the challenge now falls to Congress and the White House to forge a new, constitutionally sound trade policy. The Supreme Court restored constitutional balance, but left lawmakers with the responsibility to act. The future of U.S. trade policy now depends on effective cooperation between Congress and the president.